Hello.
Hi, Pauline.
Hi.
So when I prepare to have our dialogues together,
Mhm.
it is quite a wonderful samyama, um, where it seems like I'm going back in time and space,
Mm.
to pull out these sacred gifts and prasad to be
Mm.
able to pass on.
Yeah.
And yet what always ends up being becoming obvious is the eternal nature of this prasad
Mm.
and the manner in which it functions as one of his Siddhis
Yeah.
of divine self-revelation, the eternal constant
Mhm.
nature
Mm.
and self of being that is true of everyone and everything. So we come into this space together,
Mm.
in our distinctness, in our uniqueness.
Yeah.
Um, and as you remember, Adi Da would say to us that he loves the differences, he delights in the differences,
Mm.
that all the differences are necessary for his work. And such is the vastness then, the all-inclusiveness, and therefore the responsiveness of the vastness and the all-inclusiveness. And this ties in with what I wanted to share today because it reveals some secrets that, of course, as I've indicated, he always tells secrets. This is the nature of his work, his secrets. The
Mhm.
secrets about the divine process, and why they're called secrets is because of the fact that they have been unnoticed. They're esoteric. They seem to maybe have been hidden within the context of the great tradition, pointed to, experienced in their limited forms of the samadhis and realizations and traditions and different aspects of it as he has mapped out in the tool of the 7 stages.
Mhm.
But then he emphasizes really clearly that the way of the heart is not founded upon that structure
Mm. Yeah.
of the 7 stages psychobiography of the ego act. So his way is this revelation that stands prior and free and is all inclusive. So every time I go into looking for or considering what to bring in this um, sacred event that we're offering for others to participate in with us, is that it's still the initiatory force of what was given is constant. It's been irrevocably established. And our process is simply the responsibility for coinciding, conforming, and taking it on. As he said, it's the burden of our responsibility to be able to anchor and continue to secure his all-inclusive spherical work of the bright,
Right.
which only occludes spherically in relationship to the psychophysical anatomy because of the way that the structure is. But it's an open-ended vastness, never ending, no beginning, no end, the bright itself.
Mhm.
But is very tangibly felt also. So that's what I wanted to bring today, is to talk about the way that he worked with myself and um, women and men who were closest around him,
Yeah.
and all the, it took many permutations, which I've begun to point to in the process of sharing this prasad. Um, so I will share this with you, but I also, before we do that, because it's a continuing thread with what we've also talked about, um, is there anything you want to say or offer before I bring this in?
No, just so that just such that within the last week or so, it was shared with me an exchange that occurred, I believe, in 1992. And I certainly wasn't present. So there were things about that exchange that were obvious questions that I would have had of Beloved in terms of what he meant by certain things that maybe you can speak to. I'm not sure, in fact, if you were there, but you might have a greater sense of the overall consideration in which that dialogue took place. So that's the only thing that I would say.
Okay. And so that's the one that you shared with me where he's having a conversation with Tripura at the
Yes.
time, who is in Sukhamai. Okay, yes, I remember that. No, that I took that to heart. Actually, a couple people had sent that to me,
Oh,
interestingly enough. So it's in the psych,
in the
it's
site. Mhm.
it's whole in terms of reverberating what is the significance of this in relationship to beloved and his work. And so in that feeling, this has been part why I chose this particular empowered Prasad to bring forward. Okay. So this is a gift that I was given in it was 1996.
Hmm.
And again, this is one of these beautiful little boxes that I've
Yeah.
told you about, that just the aesthetic quality and the craftsmanship, is beautiful. And that's
Yes.
got some little bells on the top. Yeah, so the box itself is beautiful, and everything that Adi Da made use of, as I've indicated previously, was regarded sacred, and that's because of the process of recognition.
Mhm.
Recognition realization then enables one to relate to everything with the care and sensitivity to its sacred nature, because it's not just an object in time and space. It is manifesting for the purpose and the potential right use of, relative to it housing the force of the divine light and being.
Mhm.
So that everyone and everything is pervaded by this. And when there's that recognition, your relationship to how we serve anyone or anything is different than what you could even call conventional love. It has even a greater sensitivity. It doesn't negate all the ways that love can be manifested or care can be enacted, but it certainly does not advocate anything remotely like a disregard for, or an annihilation of, or a dissociation from. It's exactly not that, because in the recognition response, there isn't a differentiation in relationship to objects. And the recognition of the position within which we live is that of the very divine self condition that is love bliss itself. So that inherent quality then is the care in which you manifest and allow that force of being to carry itself through even all the qualities of life then that manifest. In other words, there isn't a recoil away from any qualities that may manifest. They're actually then creatively made use of differently. So here again, this beautiful object, so I'll put that down for now because I want to just describe the situation. So once again, after 1992, which is this particular dialogue that Adi Da had with Supapur, is ties into all of this, because repetitively, over and over again, throughout the periods of his working directly with people, his primary intention was the establishment of a mandala that included men and women, and each had their specific role, necessary function in relationship to that whole, and a divine purpose, therefore, as he described, vessels to make use of for the divine purpose, for the service of the world and of the universe as a whole, which any real yogi, saint, sage, or religious or spiritual practitioner understands that, is sensitive to that function. That's the purpose of awakening, is not for to be taken in and used for one's separate self. It's you're given over, yeah, for a greater purpose that gives profound meaning to life, rather than being focused in the particularities as for seekers' purposes. Now, this is something that obviously is not a common understanding in the world as a whole at this point in time, but this is what Adi Da was working with all the time, is to change the tide or the trend and mode of energy and attention that was constantly being fixated on the particularities in time and space, looking for happiness. And so in this particular period of time, once again, as had occurred in cycles in the midst of his work, he was again attempting to reestablish the mandala around him. And the reason why the mandala was always so flexible is because the essential patterns of power forces or icons, you know, that typify certain forms or manners of which energy is repetitively manifesting within the sphere of light itself, and becomes limited, you know, becomes apparently limited in a conditional form, whether it be gross, subtle, or causal. And so he's working as a Siddha, Siddha, avataric incarnation of the divine light itself. Then he is working literally as the Maha priest, you know, to make use of all of these to allow the light to be permeating and reverberating and manifesting and outshining and undoing limits and errors and illusions and delusions and all of that. And this is what I constantly observed, as did thousands who came into proximity with either his physical company or what he describes as his treasures. So this took place in 1996. So this was post the time that I was actually had a costume or a label, you know, or a title that had been ripped off in 1992. The Kanya order that had been established after 1986. From then until 1992, we engaged in the continued profound process of his work through us as instruments that he made use of. And that there were and it wasn't just us individually. In order for that mandala to work, required many people, you know, and he would constantly make that really clear, that there's no inside or outside to the work that I'm doing. It required everybody all at once, you know, to be able to allow this event, this happening of the divine process to manifest. And it had to manifest. It wasn't elsewhere. It was never, ever, ever elsewhere, even though in the esoteric anatomy of the body mind, it can seem to be above and beyond in relationship or deep in relative to the right side of the heart. So you've got the Amritanadi, and you've got the matrix of manifestation, you know, but in truth, when there is no point of view, wherever the view is, whether it's extended from above or deep in the heart or in the middle or the left part or in the chakras, the bride itself is no point of view. It literally can listen, hear, see, and feel the process of the perfection of the whole manifestation as one. So again, whenever he would be working to establish the mandala, it was always shifting and changing, because that's the nature of manifestation. So even the individuals and the patterns who came around him were oftentimes able to be made use of, and then they had to move on. I mean, that was just, and it was never ever felt that I had any ownership or entitlement, or that I could claim, or that I could fight for, or that I could insist upon, or be so attached to, that being close to him and in any way, shape, or form demanding that would interfere with the process. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because from, you know, the event that occurred in 1992 and the dialogue that Adi Da had with Tripura was a dialogue he had with many of us in different ways. And it's wonderful that and a lot of this will be in the archives, but this particular dialogue coming out about Tripura and her relationship to him and how she has served him and continues to do so, is important because what it points to is the qualities, the reverberations, the perturbations, the seeming differences of the patterning that manifested around him in order for him to be able to permeate and to work through, and then to purify, to undo, to release the knot of attention being bound to those particular qualities. And that had to be done at the gross level, the subtle causal levels of being in order for his work to be accomplished as the whole bodily being. So in 1986, he was again wanting to form this particular mandala because from 1986 on, and we touched on this the last time we spoke, is that he was always indicating really clearly that in order for him to be able to effectively work with a core group of renunciates, that it required the whole to assume responsibility in order for those to be supported in the ways that they needed to be set apart to be able to do that work, which wasn't like being set apart as if separated out from the world. To truly set apart in the bright is about recognition. It's not to be grossly misinterpreted as a form of separation or retreat in a mode of isolation. It wasn't that, because it never felt that way. Although we were cloistered in a way, Adi Da always broke that spell by bringing in, so many different forces, as you were probably aware of, right? They'd come in, and intentionally, he was the one who was constantly doing that, breaking the spell of our cultic kind of hankering down in a particular mode of being or operating around him. So, there would always be, he was constantly connecting with universal forces and beings all the time. And this is what this time was like in 1996. So I actually was living in Sydney when this occurred. And just to briefly tell you that the moment in which I returned to be with him again, after 1992, which was a reoccurring event, is that I would go way out and then draw me back in. And that occurred numerous times. And clear until late 2006. And so I was in Sydney, and where there was a morning where I was sitting in the meditation hall in a household of devotees. And I had this overwhelming certainty that my father had died. And it was like so strong that I had to get up from meditation and find out, what had happened. And I found out, well, in fact, no, that isn't what really occurred. And then lo and behold, I get a call from beloved, and he's, wanting to know about me. And there is this consideration that is going on again about coming back into his sphere, resuming the renunciate intimacy of yoga with him in the specific form of being closer to his body. And so I told him about this meditation. And I said I didn't really know what the significance was. And what he said to me is, I know the meaning of that. That's all you need to know. In other words, the significance of it was for him to know, and that it wasn't important for me to have to know at that time. And when I think about it, I think back, I should have insisted on, I should have asked more questions, But that kind of like impulse to have to know, the meaning, again, that was revealed over time that wasn't essential, because the necessary knowledge of it is an inherent revelation within the process itself. The significance of any arising becomes obvious and it doesn't correspond with the cosmic time. It doesn't follow the laws and the rules of cosmic nature. The manner in which this process is revealed is inherently transcending cosmic nature and its laws. So it gets revealed spontaneously as necessary through the laws of the bright process itself. Does that make sense? Yeah. And sense.
Right.
So this matter of my father's death, I won't go into that, but that was a necessary revelation relative to the Oedipal, relative to the misconceptions and myths about God and the spirit and its qualities, and then also the Atman and the source position. There's all of these reverberations relative to who or what the Father is as a symbol or a form in relationship to the psyche and the heart and the mind. So that began to, plays a key role in the unraveling of radical understanding of the nature of my relationship to Adi Da and to truth itself. So upon that confession and that exchange with him, synchronous with that, there was a huge thunderstorm that occurred in Sydney. And I remember when these considerations would happen, where there would be a shift or a turn of events, psychophysically in the cosmic realm, there were also remarkable reverberations that would happen, that would show themselves too spontaneously in the weather, in relationships, in turn of events. And you would notice these things happening. And of course, I'd always laugh about it because I would, think, oh, that has to do with beloved. And then from a kind of cultic point of view, we would think, oh, it's beloved, as if we're a devotee of Muhammad would say, oh, it's Muhammad, or a devotee of Krishna would say, oh, it's Krishna. And I giggle about that because I always saw it as a kind of a comic strip of toning down or narrowing down the divine process itself into iconography or myths or doctrines or dharma. And that humor that spontaneously would manifest when I would make these noticings, and then I would realize that was the force of his person undoing point of view relative to the super physics of how the divine process works. And so I'm sitting in the living room of this house in Sydney, and a big, beautiful picture window, and I'm watching this incredibly magnificent thunderstorm rolling through. And synchronous with that, I'm in dialogue with beloved in the island, and I know that, and I'm in dialogue with the devotees there, because any change or choice that was made was not a casual matter. There was always a very important dialogue that occurred with the culture, with the devotees that I was living with, and it would occur with those devotees with cultural servers, and it would occur with those devotees with the devotees, the renunciates who were around him, or the mandala, the dasya mandala, or whoever it was, whatever their names were or costumes were, those were always changing too. And then I would also be in direct dialogue with beloved. So see, there was the mandala of that form of consideration and process, which necessarily had to take place because his work was reverberating through all of that. And we were all inherently part of that interconnectedness. And so as I'm sitting there and I'm feeling the magnitude of whatever's going on with him, and I know that it's not about me. I mean, it's way too big to be about a me, way too big. And of course, we played with those delusions of thinking, oh, I'm the goddess, I'm this or I'm that in relationship to him. I'm this iconographic figure. I'm this historical figure in relationship to him. It was so far beyond that, And so I'm watching this thunderstorm, and it is one of the all-time biggest I've seen. Huge. The cracks and the thunder that would come and the lightning, and it would shake the house. And I'm feeling, oh, this is amazing, remarkable event. and it's all like making it really dramatic, you know. It feels like major dramatic, and it always was a really big deal, you know, to be available for changing, making changes as required to participate in the process for his divine purpose, for the yoga itself.
Yeah.
To be available for that, because I had my life, I had everything, you know, the work I was doing and the service I was doing, and then suddenly swept out and brought right back at his feet. So that's what occurred again, okay? And so you may have seen this picture, but this is the picture of there's a few pictures here that I'll hold up, and I won't say anything while I show these, but this is when I returned, and one of the things that I said to him is right before this moment, this is at Dalavananda Mahal outside of the building, and I'm one of a number of ladies and men who are coming around to begin to form the mandala that's necessary for the next leg of his work, so to speak, okay? And so here's an image of me with him. And right before this moment, I said to him, I love you, beloved. And he said, well, isn't that what we are here for, to find out?
Mm.
Now, just as a very vulnerable confession, there were so many years whenever I would say I love you to him that I was waiting to hear him say I love you back.
Mm.
And I remember him reflecting that to me by indicating that my like obsessive need to be told I love you, like just for someone to tell me I love you and to feel that that attachment and bond was intact, was something that he began to reflect to me and actually use these words that you're hunting me.
Mm.
So in that particular moment when he said to me, well, that's what we're here to find out.
Yeah.
That was a key moment that would be an indicator of how it was different after 1986. Like there was a manner in which he wasn't participating in playing the reflecting and living with and being and identifying with taking on, you know, yeah. So that it was more, okay, right, so you love me, and all right, well, that's what we're here to find out. Do you really love me? What is your fidelity to me, and for what purpose? Is it about me as I am?
Right.
Or is it a boyfriend-girlfriend thing you're trying to get on with me? Are you wanting to know that you are the one that is loved and gets attention?
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I felt up to that point in time that I was a serious devotee, he never, ever, ever failed to reflect the necessity for the radical process to be true and real, which was surrender of seeming separate self and attention to separate self and the need for attention.
Mm.
And the validation that I was loved. You know, God loves you, you know, so you're saved, that kind of mythology. No, that is not the way of the heart. And the attachment to him, even as the gopi analogy goes, not the way of the heart.
Right.
Very, very distinct difference, and particularly with the attempt to establish a mandala of women around him on his body. And because of the force of his manifest person as a man, the magnitude of what it was that he was creating and manifesting as not only the Siddha as a Siddha yoga, but also as his genius, his force of creativity. He required a number of women to balance, and to the energies and the qualities, and to live intimately with in the manner that he did in his house. It couldn't occur with just one woman. It never, ever, ever could. And likewise, it couldn't occur with just one man there attending. I mean, he required a mandala. So at this time, again, there was a consideration of establishing, as I said, a core renunciate group of women. And mainly what that meant is people who were available to completely give their lives over in recognition response. And that meant every aspect of their life. And that is what he calls the radical reality way of renunciation of ego from the beginning, no matter where you appear in the mandalic form. So that all of what we combine with serves the purpose of that divine process rather than a separate self. And when you live that, you actually find that you have more and greater sensitivity how to really live in the world, in a sensitivity with how important it is to be responsible and to be caring and to be loving, even more so than you would if you were assuming to do it for your separate self, because the separate self doesn't have that kind of sensitivity.
Right.
So this is what you realize when you actually enter into the sacred domain that is all inclusive, as we were talking about earlier. So he was trying to form a group of women that could be closest on his body to attend to his body. And he needed to have that, as I was describing before, because he was so creative. I mean, everything he did was like gifts were pouring out of him constantly. You remember that, right?
Yeah.
Like the magnitude and the abundance of what came off of his body just walking from one room to the next. It was like, send this out, do this out, give this, give that. Oh, we bring things to him. And it was this constant reciprocation of huge influx and outflow, constant abundance of it. And to not have the numbers that are required to conduct that created a bottleneck, and it actually obstructed the process. And so if someone or something that was in his sphere was for whatever reason unable to participate in that magnitude of effulgence and be freely available without constricting, then they would have to leave. And it wasn't like a condemnation. I mean, we felt it that way. That's the way we interpreted the play, as rejection and betrayal. So we ended up superimposing another drama on top of the purity of what was actually occurring. And that is what he describes in the trilogy so exquisitely.
Yeah.
So there were 4 women who came around him at this particular time, and I'm going to hold up an image of these 4 ladies. And then around these ladies, there were more men and women who were what were described as Dasya Mandala. In other words, they were ones who were serving the process to make sure that this core process would be able to be enabled with, so he could work very intimately and directly with these vessels. So this is an image of the women who he was working with at that time. So you see Adi Da there in the center.
Yeah.
And Tripura is behind him.
Yeah.
And then Pi is down at his feet. And she's actually got his foot in her hand. And then Nadikanta, he has his hand stretched out upon her shoulder.
Yes.
So you see, and then I'm there on his heart, with my hand on his heart. And so we're all there as one.
Yeah.
And in harmony and in love.
Beautiful.
Now, it's extremely colorful, and I mean that in every sense of its qualities. because as I indicated before, all of us are manifesting there around him with our gross, subtle, and causal permutations.
Yes.
There is the magnitude of the force of his person and his transmission, his Hridaya Shakti, working in and through us. And the only way that the mandala is able to function is if we are transparent. And that means business handled that creates constrictions in the midst of the mandala and interferes with the linking therein. And sometimes if the forces of our dramatization, which there were plenty of, you know, I mean, that's a beautiful picture, but there's all of what we know went on 24/7 around him, you know, in either on his body. That's when, you know, we appeared with this kind of an image being able to be manifest. But we also know that there was our dramatization that was synchronously happening with this, that was parts of the ego self that hadn't been transcended, that we hadn't taken responsibility for, which he had to consistently address. And he was required to do so, even though he called for it to come to a closure of that necessity for him to have to do that in 1986, but that never actually ended up happening sufficiently for him to say that, you know, for there to be a stable order established around him that was also just magnifying itself by virtue of its authenticity. It was also growing and attracting an attractive force that is the same as his being. So there were many other ladies who came in, and this has actually got a lot of Leelas that link in with this event. Okay, so when I arrived, after I showed you that picture, we of course then launched into days and nights on end of consideration, and not verbal. I'm talking about like actually living with one another, men and women, in and out of his house, and considerations about what's happening with his work, incredible dharma. He spoke about the pleasure dome at this time, and patterning, and this is when the you know, I think it was third congregation or acknowledgement of the expansion of his work and the all-inclusiveness of those who wanted to support him, you know, as patrons, as advocates, and it was very expansive time. And this actually, at the end of this period of time, it was when Adi Da went off to New York, and went into his family home, did a pilgrimage there, and all sorts of incredible things occurred at that point. I have a photograph album here of many of those images, and I don't have time to like go through all of the images, but when I came into the gathering room where Adi Da was sitting, one of the things that he occurred is that he, at that time, he was collecting vases. Okay, beautiful. You were thinking.
I was reflecting on his vase collection at the beginning of our talk. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was envisioning, because you were talking about the, you know, the box, and I immediately brought back to recollection seeing this room in Naitamba just full of vases, and they were all like their own being with, and of course, you know, what comes to mind is the they're breathers. I mean, they breathe, you know, they have like a kind of, and I feel like you may have even used I mean, they have always been typically used as artistic subjects, you know, traditionally by painters and so on, but yes.
Right. That's it. Yeah, there you go. So the vase, yes, and the yogic, the pot belly.
Yes, the pot belly.
You said it conducts, or it holds. It's a vessel.
Yes.
And so, and this is an example of what you're describing, is about how these just seeming objects, then he's bringing a greater view into the symbol or the manifest sign, the structure or the form of anything, in terms of how it conducts or relates to the divine process. And he and often this is a way that he would connect with the world, as he connected with artisans. And he would, whenever he would be brought something as a gift by a devotee, or he would travel into a museum or a gallery or something like that, and he would appreciate the work of an artist, he would always establish a direct relationship with these people and express his appreciation and his gratitude and the beauty of it, and he'd ask about it. He'd get involved in these incredible dialogues with these artists. And so when I arrived at this time, he was involved in collecting these vases. And so after this moment on the grass, outside on the lawn, when I and other devotees, new arrivals, new retreatants, it wasn't just me. So there are images, like I happen to have these images because they're mine, from my direct relationship to Beloved and the Prasad of that event. But there will be others who were there on that lawn. I would say probably 10 or more apart from myself, who had the same embrace. That wasn't just me. There were other retreatants that were there. And over the years, sometimes there'd be hugs because it was a smaller group, of people who were arriving or people that he had lived intimately with before. So the coming and going of those into his sphere, was always a great occasion, great reception. And it was meant everything to him, devotees coming and going into his sphere.
Yes, seeing that photo reminded me of when I went into the room and he embraced me in the same way. But all I have a memory of that moment was how sublime, but also how soft and tender he was. So he felt so incredibly porous. And for me to even utter the words, I love you, like when you were stating that, I understand the impulse, right? I understand it in relationship in a conventional sense. It would have been ridiculous for me in my state to utter such words, because there was no sense of, you. It was like, there was just this sense of being and love itself. Do you understand? Yeah. But so I understand. That's the thing for me, that I draw tremendous value from these Leelas in particular, is because of the fact that embedded in your Leela telling is the actual historical sacrifice of his submission. That that can't be done away with. There was a good 20 years of him submitting himself in a manner to allow human beings to enter into a play with him, that by the time I combined with him, that was simply not that. I mean, it was understood that he was not able to do that, but also it wasn't on the basis of that I was there. So I find it a beautiful, however, whatever the errors, whatever the mistakes that were allowed by virtue of that sacrifice, I still find it a tremendous, I mean, it's a love story. It's a sacrifice of love, and out of love, out of which a tremendous gift for all of humanity was given. Yeah. So that's why I delight in it, and I don't mind at all hearing these, confessions. There's no judgment on my part if I hear you tell it exactly like it is, because that's what's so beautiful about it. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Pauline. And I hear what you're saying, and I feel it. And to hear your understanding or recognition of his play and process in this way makes it worth it. The sacrifice was real on his part and on our part, because it was a cellular level, and in which this gross persona literally had to go through incredible fire to be able to stay and be there. And inevitably there were going to be errors. I mean, clearly, it couldn't have been any other way. So but the liability of what I always did was make a judgment about it from an egoic perspective. There was always that liability to do that.
Or try to
and
correct the error and rewrite history, you know.
make it different than what it was.
What it
Wherein
was.
the beauty of it is in the perfection of the happening itself, just as it
Exactly.
was.
Yes.
Yeah.
I even, having seen a short video of his parents discussing what he was like as a child. I mean, he was always so much energy, constantly onto new things. I mean, it seems to me that he came into this world just completely magnanimous, and certainly recognition allowed beings to come around him in order to support that increasingly so that he could accomplish his work. That's a remarkable Leela in and of itself.
Yes, yes. And when you read all of the breadth of what he has described about his own personal life and process, he is completely unabashed in telling all the details. I'm entirely uninhibited and does not hide anything, even down to the details of him being aware of how obnoxious he was.
Yeah.
You know, when he describes himself as Franklin,
Yes.
and he really bother people, and I mean, just aware of the language that just so frank.
Yes, Frank, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
You know, unabashed. And that was the way that I felt he was allowing, you know, in the earlier years, and even more so than when I arrived, because as time seemingly went on, there was a process that was occurring for him in which these adjustments had to be made because he'd given the lesson.
Yeah.
Even if we didn't accept it,
Right.
he had accomplished it. You know, he had given what he needed to, and he couldn't make people respond or accept it or take responsibility for it. He couldn't do that.
Right.
You know, so laying the responsibility on him relative to what was ours to do and continues to be so is an entirely wrong relationship to understanding the nature between a Siddha yoga and a true devotee of any tradition when it's genuine. You reminded me of a moment when you were describing what it was like for you when you first came, you know, into his sphere, and because as had occurred in the entirety of his physically embodied Leela, it had come full circle. You know how from the beginning he said that he thought he was just going to give his teaching, and he even described himself as having a bit of naivete in relative to how it would unfold. He didn't know, but he also, though, prophetically had written through the process of what occurred on the beach.
Yes.
You know, when he investigated the entirety of and synchronicity of the world and the psychophysical nature of it. And then the mummery book, you know, water and fire, the original form of
Love
the mummery.
exit water.
Yes. Well, in any case, when you came around earlier on, but you were always present. I mean, you know, you as part of the divine being, and you came into a gross conjunction.
Yes.
And then, but there's your deeper personality and also the force of the causal nature of manifestation and identification. And you're with whatever is there present with your coinciding with the divine process through the great tradition combines with Adi Da and his incarnation, as it is with all of us. So at the point in time when you arrived, you see, he had in a very real, not in a very real, he actually then brought the whole Leela around to the very beginning again. It's where the very beginning meted the seeming apparent end, where there is no end and there is no beginning, there is no beginning and there is no end. But his whole life Leela is the paradox of that manifestation, where he had to actually address the full spectrum in time and space while he's magnifying the reality position of no space and time that is all inclusive. And so that and in the mirror, in the middle, and in the teaching time, we were all hunkered down into looking at the stuff in time and space. And the test was, remember me.
Right.
Is this process occurring in satsang? Have you forgot satsang? Have you forgot truth itself? What is the purpose of what we're doing together? What is your impulse? Are you rightly aligned to this? Are you true to me in that? Do you recognize my function, my person, not as this gross Franklin Jones only, that is gone now, is not even relevant to our process with one another, except for that I understand everything about what you're experiencing because I lived it. Now I'll live it with you and teach you. And then we went through him saying, can't do that, but we forced him to, required him to, and then he had to keep addressing more and further aspects of it, this, that seemed to be nuances of the more advanced process or whatever, but he's saying, I've already addressed you about this, but I'm doing it again because you don't seem to have understood or gotten it yet. And then at the end, he then did the whole recapitulation again in the Aletheon and the Gnosticon and the Pneumaton and the trilogy and all of, there's a reconfiguration of all the books again. And then he brought it, then some people will characterize it as if then it was only about the radical teaching, as if, what do you mean? It's always only been about the radical teaching.
Right.
And then he's saying, I shouldn't even have to have uttered a word, except that I had to account for beginners. So the whole thing that I've spoken of before is all about the preparatory process. It's all about beginners. And yet you landed, and from my understanding and feeling reception of your Leela, is that for whatever reason, your availability for the radical process and the ability to comprehend the whole of it was unique. And so it wasn't arbitrary that you were called into his person, however it happened to be on his body. And as you have reflected to me, that what was made obvious to him by your coming into his company was that there wasn't a culture that had prepared you rightly for how he could have made use of you uniquely. That had to do with the Leela that you needed to become intimate with in terms of that. But you're also confessing a sensitivity already to that because of the years that you have been around, observing and questioning and wondering, and your curiosities and your participation in his art process and the transcendental nature of that.
Yeah, but some part of me really feels very strongly that he led me to you in order to really, there's a bunch of things that happened between 2008 and 2018 that happened because he had given me very, very concrete instruction relative to, say, for example, study the basket of tolerance. I was like, okay. I'm looking around and I'm like, where is it? You know what I mean? How do I study it? What should I, who do I talk to? There was no self-evident means. Now, he didn't give that instruction to me individually. He's given that instruction to every single one of his devotees, but he was particular in that particular instruction relative to me. And so I said, okay, master says, devotee do. How do I go about doing it? It took some time for the grace given means whereby that could even be accomplished, self-accomplished by grace.
Right.
And it happened, I don't know, several years after his divine Mahasamadhi, at which point I had that Satori, aha, this is why he asked me, and these are the books that he wanted, because he was very specific, the epitome list. And once I read them, I was like, aha, I understand why he gave that instruction. And it has fulfilled a function in my process by serving greater understanding relative to the seventh stage, right? Recognition and comprehension of where these traditions align and what the precursors were, both in the Shakti tradition and the Shiva tradition, the male and the female, what is unique about the seventh stage, and both male and female, and the husbanding, if you will. I mean, interestingly enough, even in the Tripura Rahasya, You can read that book and you can believe that it's a 7-stage text, but the
Right.
nuances of what actually is the distinction between, say, that text and Beloved's revelation, for example, all of that, like, there wasn't a culture that gave that to me. There wasn't a culture that was making that available to me. All of that
Yes.
happened absolutely by grace through divine means, as far as I can tell. And the same mechanism and means by which I have come into contact with you, whereby the Leela has become much more colorful to me because it's being recounted by somebody who was there.
Right. Yeah.
And
I hear
being
what
told honestly, it's not a revision, it's not a whitewashed version, it's not a, heavily edited version. It's just plain old, this is how it was. No praise, no blame. You know
Yes,
what I
and
mean?
it has exactly, and it has to do with what Adi Da revealed to me, and not only to myself, but with those who actually understand this, is that you can't edit yourself. You can't edit anything out, because that's a superimposition of ego presumption of it having to be a certain way in order for truth to be revealed. That's not at all the way that the process works. That's asked backwards, to say it bluntly. So you do not know how the means will be working with the fabrication in order for the revelation to break through. You can't prejudge it. So that was part of the free fall. That is the reality process, to not be afraid. And yet to also know the distinction between merely relating to what arises and allowing to be what it is, the difference between that and actual dramatization of the ego.
Right.
Very important distinction.
Which is something I wanted to note, is because you mentioned he was always working with the subtle, the causal, the subtle, and the gross simultaneously in any circumstance. Now, that's something that you can state from a place of real comprehension and understanding, but I'm not certain that most people will tangibly or tactically comprehend what that means. And so I believe you and I had a dialogue once wherein I asked you, there was some kind of exchange that you were recounting that you had with Beloved. Oh, I recall now. And I was asking you relative to if you could have gone back into that moment and done it, redone it, and from the place of understanding that you were communicating in present time relative to the recounting of that exchange. I was asking you if what you meant was you wouldn't have outwardly expressed what was being felt inwardly, like is that what you meant by dramatization? Because I feel like there's something to be said for, I think it was, and I can't quite remember exactly because there's been so many beautiful gems of Leelas that you have shared with me, wherein there was some kind of exchange with Beloved, and there was something that you were feeling subjectively, for example. And there, you were burning up. You would spend the night with Beloved and you were burning up. So for me, for example, if I had felt that kind of burning up that you were describing, I would have felt implicitly by being in proximity to him, he was automatically feeling everything that was going on inside me, right? And that by virtue of even experiencing it, I was dramatizing. But that's not what you mean by dramatization, because what you're meaning is he would allow for the purification to happen in the case of whoever it was that was in his company. It would be the identification with whatever was occurring, be it internal, like an internal experience. It would be the identification with that, and then somehow then the acting upon that identification that would be the dramatization. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, precisely. Yes, yes.
I didn't mean to like muddy the waters there, but I was trying to like
no, that clarification
one-liner.
It's really important.
Yes.
And it can be, the dramatization is as subtle as or as causal as the root knot of attention.
Right.
or identifying with spirit as if spirit itself is the same as the unqualified light of the bright.
Right.
And as gross as identifying with the separate self persona or the deeper personality, whether if you're aware of it or not, and just acting upon the basis of the assumption of that patterning. That's dramatization. But to allow something to be as it arises without identification with it is ego self-transcending yoga.
Right.
The ego self is created by the act of identification via attention.
Right.
And these are profundities, but if these kinds of profundities are not actually understood by each and every devotee, the uniqueness of the way of the heart and the bright process is not understood.
Right.
It just becomes an entering into the process from the first three stages of life, and then the fourth, and then the fifth, and then the sixth, which is what we did with him, and he lived that with us so that he could say, notice this,
Right.
and notice me. Can you feelingly feel the significant context within which satsang occurs?
Right.
And allows everything to be as it is, arising, and recognize it? Or are you going to act
Right.
via attention and act upon the basis of identification with ego separate self?
It's really profound. And there's much that he describes about the actual process as it manifests within the frontal line, for example, and just in chapter 44, as we've spoken about, for example, in the Dawn Horse Testament, and some of the criticisms that he would have, say, for example, of individuals using terms that, might appear in notes, that might just seem very targeted, but then you go back and you read the Dawn Horse Testament and they're all the same words that are in the Dawn Horse Testament that he was using. So it's completely compatible with the yoga itself. It wasn't like you're a bad person. No, he's addressing the yoga. Every time he's giving notes, he's simply addressing the yoga.
Yeah, the word hunting, for example, is in the Dawn Horse Testament. That comes from a dialogue with me.
Wow, see, it's beautiful.
Just when you, I might as well say it, but that's, that, like I said, they weren't picked out of the sky. They actually came out, like you say, conversation, a direct conversation, the secret of testaments, the direct conversation and relationship wherein the secrets are revealed, both the secret of the ego self, or the secret of the reality truth itself. Which do you choose? Do you want to keep your secret, or do you want to know the heart secret? When you reminded me, when you were describing your coming into Adi Da's intimate sphere, which was incredibly profound and revelatory, for me to hear that, it too, because I wasn't physically there at that time of his work, is as critical for me to be able to understand what continued to occur. Like I could assume, because of the reverberations and my sensitivity to how it had happened and how it was continuing to happen, I could perhaps make assumptions, but because I could read the signs, as they would reverberate on out, no matter where I was. But when I actually hear you describe what occurred for you and what happened and how it occurred and how it involved everyone that was around him, it just brings alive the whole process of the actual intimacy, the sacred nature of the yoga, and the needs of the divine process that are essential to be in place to serve anyone such as yourself or any being at all, and continue to serve my process. The necessity of what's needed in the entirety of the mandala manifesting to make it possible for us to advance with integrity, not meaning hierarchically advance, but to grow beyond and stand prior to everything that is merely arising as seemingly conditional finite form, but then to recognize it as the instruments, the articles, the tools, the means, the elements to be able to make use of in the Mahapuja of the divine yoga.
Yeah.
So Yeah. So when Adi Da, during this particular period of time, I was seeing an image of that occurred that reminded me then of something else he said to me. And here's another image here.
Mm.
And of course you can see there, like his shape would shift in shape also, according to what it was that he was working with too. And of course, yeah. So that's Sukumai's hand that is on his neck, and we're sitting on a large bed that has like a canopy on the top. You know, it's really a big seat, and so that when we would sit, all four of us would sit up there with him at the time, and then there would be devotees that would be gathered around in front of him, where we would have these considerations with them. You know, that were full of darshan, just sitting silently, oftentimes maybe listening to sacred music or musicians or gifts being brought to him, or you know, dialogues about what we were going to do, where we were going to go, how we were going to serve, how devotees, getting reports from devotees worldwide, actually being in direct dialogue with devotees worldwide. Like there would actually be a phone that would be brought into the room where he could talk to devotees directly. He did that with Nick while I was there. You know, had a very intimate, profound dialogue with Nick, sitting on that bed with him while I was there next to him. But with this intimacy, there was a time when I again was, you know, served him throughout the night, and oftentimes we might be sexually intimate with him or not. You know, it was that the sexual intimacy was not the focus of the intimacy. We would tend to make it that way in our reducing it down to something, you know, just as a gross phenomenon. But and this was one of the most heartbreaking moments when he looked at me, you know, face to face, as you've seen in these images, and he says to me in the vulnerability that you were describing about how soft he was, even with the huge force of his being in person, how incredibly soft and gentle, you know, and then he looked at me, you know, with tears in his eyes, and he said, I can never love you enough. Which again was the same communication when I said to him, I love you. And he said, well, that's what we are here to find out. Right. Do you love me? What will you do if you love me? What is the nature of your love? I can't love you enough. You know, I love you completely and absolutely, and yet that does not appear to be enough. Right. So as a lover, as a man, as guru, as Siddha, you know, it's like he's saying, I can never love you enough. You know, so that reflection to me, again, is one of those moments where there's an incredible reverberation of what is the true asana of the devotee, and even a lover, for that matter, a true lover. How does one participate in true love? You know, at the human level, in spirit and in truth as the very self. And his demonstration was what it was, is to be love, like absolutely surrendered and sacrificed, to be given over and to be giving and to constantly communicate in every way possible that love is the condition of being. And that nature is what will bring about sacred culture, living that. And because the process is eternal, any mistakes that have been made or seeming falling short, in a moment, he would always say, it could be corrected just like that. Every moment is a new beginning. Every seeming moment is a new beginning. You know, and when there are the force of that in numbers, so to speak, you know, brings the bright fabrication alive, so that it can, the force of the bright itself can permeate and break the bonds of egoic conditional fabrication of light. Brightening and outshining, as he describes it. So it's not an abstract thing, it's actually literal.
Oh, it's tangible. Yeah.
Yeah, tangible. It's it's more real than the way that the ego presumes and thinks it to be. It's
Right.
actually the actual nature of how reality, truth, and life is and works, and is and conducted, that will break the spell of the darkness of this and what this creates. And that responsibility is what he's always been communicating. So to share this, it's like inevitably there's always something to say about the falling short, because that's like, you have to see that. That's wherein the awakening occurs, that something different needs to be enacted. There's a change of action required, and that occurs spontaneously, not the other way around. And that's what makes it effortless. If it's true, then it's effortless and searchless and egoless. Those are the language that's used around it. But those aren't abstract rooms that you can put on as costumes. T-shirt, I'm egoless because I wear orange, you know, or I have all of the accoutrements that make me look like a traditional sannyasin or whatever. I mean, we've played all that out, you know. It has nothing to do with any of those roles or costumes whatsoever. It's much more tangibly ordinary and simple and innate and native to the being. And that's partly why Adi Da was constantly changing costumes, to kind of let it be seen. It had nothing to do with this. It's entirely arbitrary, but significant for what purpose? So I'm noticing I haven't even shown you what I wanted to yet, but that's okay.
That's okay.
We have no
I have
timeline.
plenty of time, just so you know. I'm not.
So just to bring this, I did want to tell the story of how this came into being. The object that I want to show you is that, so out on the lawn, I walked into the house, and then he had already come in and sat down in this seat that I just showed you, where he's sitting, and in a room with devotees. And I come in and I walk in through the door, and to his right, I'm walking in the door into a hallway that either goes into what is a private library, level 6 hall, meditation room, or you can go down the hall into his bedroom and his private quarters, and there's a superkendra down there, or you could go forward around a little corner, you'd be in the lanai. But we were in the room to the right, to his right, my left. And so I started walking in, and then he's receiving a beautiful glass blown vase, and then he points to me and he said, "And she broke my favorite vase." Okay, and always breaking things, you know. It's like reflecting to me, which was known, is that there was something about my relationship to him that had a force of impact that I would had an effect, whether it be positive or negative. It was felt pretty strongly. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't really very subtle. So very early on, like in the late 70s, I was cleaning something when we were in Hawaii. It was a trip that we took to Hawaii, one of the very, very early ones. And this was when Leela was conceived, when we were there. And I had accidentally been dusting something, and what, unbeknownst to me, one of those beautiful blown, it was a round, beautiful globe-like looking vase, you know, beautiful colors in it. And it was sitting on one of those old kind of 50s laminate side tables. You know how they have those shiny tops, so it's relatively slippery. And I was dusting it, and I accidentally hit it, and it went sliding off onto the floor and broke.
Mm.
The whole thing broke. And at that point in time, I think I had indicated before when I broke the Kachina doll,
Yeah.
that I was, you know, in the process of learning the significance of the things around him. And again, I just went into the kitchen. I broke the vase. And it wasn't like I thought, oh my God, I've done something terrible. I didn't even know how to relate to it. It was like, oh dear, I broke the vase. I went into the kitchen and I got the room and the just locked it up. You know, you know, and there wasn't anybody around, oddly enough, so nobody even known that I had done it.
Right.
And so I sweep it up and everything, and I take it in the kitchen, I put it in the trash. and then afterwards, I knew that I had to tell him though that I had done this.
Yeah.
You know. So when he came out of his bedroom, he usually had gone into the bedroom in the afternoon to have a relax or to ride or spend time with one of the ladies or whatever. And he had come out. And then so I told him that I broke the vase. And again, his whole body did this breaking out into a sweat, you know, where it was clear that what I had done had impacted him. In that moment, he turned around, walked away, went into his bedroom and shut his door. Like I you know, and that was like, okay, I didn't really know how to relate to that response, but okay, that was it. That was done. And he went back in there, and then a lot of devotees arrived because we were going to have a gathering again. So devotees were arriving and preparing for the gathering, and so then as I was standing outside of his bedroom, maybe, you know, a few hundred feet away. And in the room where we were going to gather, that was down a few stairs, and he comes up behind me and he whispers in my ear, if ever you begin to own too much or know too much, you're going to get yourself into a great deal of trouble.
Mm.
That was his response to me
Mm.
after I had broken that vase.
Mm.
Again, that's another moment in which that the reverberations of the impact of that event itself and what I had done and how that related to him and his sensitivities in relationship to that vase and what that represented for him and how he was working with it and my unconsciousness. And then he says that to me. That still reverberates the significance of that moment. So when he, in 92, you know, this is a lot later, close to 20 years later almost, he brings that moment up again when I broke his favorite vase. And he went on laughing hysterically about how I had done this and I had broken his favorite vase. And then, and as he was doing this, as I walked into the room, I went into an amazing force of Kriya, of Shakti force of Kriya, in response to what he was saying and doing, and the laughter and everybody laughing with him. It was like this cacophony, you know, of bringing attention to this breaking of the vase. And I had done it, you know, and it was just huge, you know, big. And I was having like verbal, woo, you know, big, like Kriyas and yelling out, I love you know, like it's like this, it was another a moment, spontaneous moment of the manifestation of his force and the exchange with everybody and magnified by everybody's participation in it. And it was coming through me, you know. And then he said to somebody, you know, take her into the other room until she's able to quiet down a bit. And then so I said, and so some, you know, a couple of ladies brought me in there, and then I I'm like, I'm okay. Can I come? And he, you know, from the other room, he's saying, I'll be the judge of this. You know, so there's this kind of play going on, and there's the thick Shakti, you know, the force,
the
the feeling is being and the play of it all together. And then the vase, this kind of all again. And while then I come back in a little while later, I come back into the room and I sit up on the bed with him and next to him. And this time I'm on his right side and where I was before, actually, in that same image. But and as I sat on the bed next to him after this had all occurred, my head went and rested into the right side of his chest. And immediately, everything was drawn prior to the whole event of what had just happened. And it was this way because I had and my whole head and whole being just fell into his heart on his right side. And I remember the worlds fall out of my right hand. My right hand is the world. Like this, the poetry. And then suddenly there's just still silence. Like the whole cacophony had come to a resolve in the stillness and the sweet nectarous bliss of no arising. No, that bhava.
Yeah.
In his heart, And then in a moment I turned out and the cacophony happened again. Everything's, it's like I'm seeing worlds manifest, just out like that. And then I'd fall back in and that happened a number of times, that turning and noticing. And then I then felt I need to tell him. I need to speak to him about that. So I described to him, I went up to his ear and I described to him, what was occurring in his heart and how the world, how the worlds were falling out with his right hand, and the right side, the whole. It's like, this is true. This is not just poetry, and this is this bhava and sahaja and the whole event. And I go whisper it in his ear, and he said, "That's our secret. That's our secret. That's our secret." Now, and as I've told you many times before, that's not a secret to be kept hidden.
Right.
And it's not a secret between two. That's the secret of the heart, the I am. And I can hear cranes singing, "I am the secret of the heart, I am." I am you, I am the heart. It's just, that was the moment that he then, this is where I can bring out this particular, he gave this to me because this little pouch contains some bolts, okay? This is a cute little pouch. This is some silk, and it's got some gold threads, around it. Yeah. And this is something that he gave me that he wanted me to wear, okay? As a result of this moment of arrival and what happened, because what he began to explain to some of the devotees in the room and for the days that followed was the coinciding with the force of his, what he described as his thunder, the thunder of Da, the thunder of manifestation. And he described, often would use the term a thunderbolt. Like he's a thunderbolt of wisdom. And so he gave this to me, and devotees began to bring to him bolts.
Oh, like an actual up?
An actual bolt.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Not just one, but two.
Mm.
Okay. And so he had this little pouch made, and he had these little bolts put in there for me to wear.
Mm. Yeah. So one's male, one's female.
Mm. It's a extraordinary, again, it's Prasad. These sat on his tray in front of him on that bed for days. And then he asked to have this pouch made and gave it to me as Prasad, a form of remembrance of the event of his divine self-revelation that encompasses all of what I just spoke to you about. So again, these are seemingly ordinary objects and functional, necessary for water to flow. I mean, you know, it's the thunderbolt, the bolt of lightning, but tangible in this particular form, just as when any of these objects become sacred in nature because they carry the force of the Leela, divine. And so I wore these a lot. And when I do, again, of course, the whole force of the impact of that revelation and that lesson of how to be able to conduct the right response in relationship to the force of his transmission. And I can, you know, the searing, I can feel the searing, you know, in the right side here, even as I lay it on my chest, and still feel, you know, and then how manifestation comes into being. These gifts are the eternal gifts, secrets of the heart. And it's just a simple pouch, you know. We're just simple pouches, you know. I mean, it's all ends up revealing the nature of everyone and everything and anything that he relates to. So if I'm ever able to, you know, if these are ever able to be housed properly, you know, then, I mean, how sad would it be for such gifts to be either sequestered away and never to be seen or shown? But how wonderful it would be for these to be able to be sacredly offered in a manner in which people can actually see them, images and the Leelas associated with this profound accomplishments of his irrevocably established blessed grace.
I can even envision him instructing that there should be such a guild that is entrusted with gathering these items and documenting them, ensuring that they, you know, are rightly cared for as sacred treasures. Because yes, you are going to abandon your body at some point, so the lawfulness with which that should be taken care of.
Yes, yes. And there's the profundity of how many gifts have been given is the magnitude by which his grace will become tangibly incarnate through the passing on of this prasad in just the manner that you're speaking. And there's thousands of people who have been given these that need to offer it this way so that for generations in
Yeah.
time and space.
Yeah.
These are tangibly present,
Right.
you know, and then you can viscerally feel the import, because these are the vessels, the vases, you know, that when shattered, you know, the vase is transcended ultimately,
Right.
but yet
Temple
everything
space.
continues to rise.
Right.
So, and everything continues to arise. So there always is a vase. You know, there is the manifest form that must be able to conduct and house all of it.
Mm.
Mm.
I didn't send that one to you. I sent you recently, I think a link to something that came up so in the span of one day, coincidentally, two totally different videos were, I don't know, just appeared within my awareness. One was relating to a sacred temple in Egypt, right?
Right.
And then there was another one later on that day that was the original palace of King Francis the First was the one that built it, but it became, the palace of the French. And it was the but I can't even remember the name, but it predates Versailles in any case.
Mm.
And that one they both were relating to the element of water. And why I found this profound was because we had been speaking about the sacred elements in one of our, previous discussions as regards puja
Mm.
and fire, water, air, earth, being some of the elements that Beloved brought into the pujas. But these temples, it seems to me, dating way back, one of them, they both were mastering the element of water and utilizing it in order to create a sacred space.
Mm.
So both functional, in a self-sustainable way, but also a place where beings can come into. In any case, the reason why I bring it up is that the same person who did the video on the water temple in Egypt,
Mm.
she did another video that I stumbled upon wherein she was describing going into one of these temples in Egypt and experiencing, there was the description by more than one people in this video describing more or less a transmission experience. They had, by virtue of beholding the goddess Sekhmet, right, in this sacred temple. So obviously, whoever established this temple and established this statue, empowered it with a very profound, or it's aligned with, energies and so on. But there was a very conscious creation of a temple space that is impacting, affecting, and being felt tangibly within the body, minds of people present day. A very potent space. It seems to me that these sacred objects that Beloved empowered, they carried such a force with them that serves that same function. And that's the basis on which I say it's extremely, it's an act, it's a responsive act of recognition to rightly care for them in perpetuity, as are his sacred empowered sanctuaries. For the sake of preserving that function that was received and given so generously given by him to beings during his lifetime, so that that function may continue in the lifetimes of countless others. Because it really does have a very specific function, this transmission. It's not just words in a book. It's a Siddha yoga tradition, and it has a very necessary and important function in this world.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yes. And that is why he emphasized so much right before his Mahasamadhi that the leaders needed to be told
Right.
in detail for the very reason that you're speaking of. And he said that that this is not being spoken in the public,
Right.
by the people who had participated. So that's in part why we're doing this, is in response to his instruction in that regard. And the culture itself is the living Leela. That is what culture is the living Leela, the eternal, the present living Leela. And our responsibility as custodians are to keep it alive.
So I feel like an entire session could be devoted to that one exchange that was mentioned at the beginning, but just maybe you can clarify for me. I mean, obviously we can break this dialogue up, or if you have to go, that's fine too. But specifically in that exchange, there's one line that Beloved states to Tripura, where he says something to the effect of, and so there are certain things that you just do not do.
So I would think, I think I actually put that particular exchange on the Evelyn Exposed and Freed site.
Yes.
Yes. And so reading through that, I think it would probably be good to reference this specific back and forth. But I do recall that that occurred after I left in 1992, and she had gone with me. She actually left the island with me, and then she, with Michael Wood and some others, ended up going on to the Mountain of Attention, and I ended up coming here to Australia. And then so she was herself, involved in a process of profound consideration with Beloved, in addition to myself and those all that he was conducting this with, in terms of that huge shift at that point in time, which tied into what he was addressing in that dialogue with Sukumar. And apart from that specific comment that he made, what he was addressing was the deeper personality aspects of the being.
Right.
And before the consideration was initiated in 1992 that precipitated this shift in his work and the breaking up of the Kanya order, it was another moment where he was indicating that he had that something needed to change in the manner in which he was working, in the manner in which he was working with us, because there was a spell that wasn't being broken relative to what was necessary for the transition, into the full responsibility for the 7th stage process itself. And he said, I've done everything that I possibly can working with you directly, but it's going to require some of you to have to leave my company. And he said, I don't know which one of you it's going to be or who it's going to be. And I've described this before. It was an incredibly emotional dialogue that occurred, indefinable. And he said that he did not know, he was not prophesying how it would be, but he said, we're going to have to enter into a consideration in which a profound shift is going to have to happen for the sake of my work. And of course, anything that happened in relationship to the sake of his work, for those of us most intimately close to him, it had gross, subtle, and causal implications in our lives and in relationship to those around him, in the mandala, in his life, all together. Again, being elements, articles, and within which this Maha Yoga, the Da Ashramedha, is active. His avatar, incarnation, intervention, and outshining. Yeah. And so at this moment in time, we had been involved in the depth process of the perfect practice, stand in consciousness as the witness, the whole yoga of that for years. And and then also he was simultaneously revealing to us some of the conjunctions that brought about our being in his sphere associated with Rama Krishna Vivekananda, and different qualities of our personas as patterning that converge to bring our gross manifestation into being. So, as he had indicated to, and part of this talk that you're speaking about is Sukamai having aspects of the pattern that is patterning in association with her bodily incarnation is Sister Christine, that was associated with Vivekananda. And the four kanyas, he indicated which we were each associated with. And I was Josephine McLeod, and Nadipanta was Nivedita, and Supriti was Sarah Bull. And so we entered into some study, about this tradition, about Vivekananda, and there's lots and lots and lots and lots of dialogues about that, to the point where he basically said, you're too obsessed with it, particularly with Nadipanta, who loved the Nivedita and Vivekananda, association. So he was pointing to the conjunctions and binding bonds of the mechanisms that brought this conjunction into being for his incarnation and our relationship to him. And then, of course, that reverberated out around into the whole mandala. Devotees were involved in considering what aspects of their deeper personality, meaning, more subtle than the gross, and in the higher, the fourth and the fifth stage phenomena associated with the ability to see the whole, that is a patterning that isn't only fixed within gross time and space. And as a matter of fact, at this particular time that I was bringing about this Leela, he was also speaking to us about how our sense of the patterning and click-clack, and our sense of identification with who we are in this lifetime does not at all manifest in the fashion that we think. So it's not an identity that is, there's not an identity that is the gross persona, or that is an identity as a separate independent soul that is identified with a deeper personality, whether it be Sister Christine for Sukamai, or Josephine McLeod for me, or Nivedita for Nadipanta, or Sarah Gold for Supriti, and then all the daughters, and Adi Da indicating, who they were associated with, and and then some in the men, and it just, all the reverberations. And then, of course, throughout our relationship to him, there were different times where he would say, you were this pattern, you were this person, you were there at this time, and you were this, and so we all had these becoming, and he was helping us become aware, if we related to it rightly and understood what he was pointing to, the qualities of the patterning and the forces associated with it that had to be undone, not identified with. So that's what the dialogue is with Sukamai, is she was becoming aware as she's speaking to him, the levels at which he was working with, because what he had said is that there was still unhandled business, or conjunctions of bondage of energy and attention that were, no matter whatever we had gone beyond to that point, that was sufficient for him to be able to work with us as he did. He said it wasn't enough. Unhandled business, the conscious feeling awareness to go beyond, to transcend these patterns. There wasn't responsibility, there wasn't conscious participation and responsibility relative to certain aspects of our being. And so he said that the shift had to occur, not only in us, because if it had to occur with us, it was also part of the whole, because we weren't independent of it. It was also part of the world. There wasn't a differentiation to be made in that regard relative to his work. It was all one process. There's only one event. There's only one process occurring. And to be able to feel that wide and in recognition relative to what he was working with, he also got very much into the specifics so that he could address the details of what the insight and understanding, radical understanding that was necessary relative to taking responsibility for how to conduct that process in relationship to our own unique psychophysical mechanisms. So that's what the details of that consideration is about. And I think it could be good and useful to look at it in more detail, because if any one of us are set up or put in a position where there's too much focus on the qualities that reverberate in relationship to our psychophysical manifestation, independent of the whole,
Right.
then it begins to define. It begins to define his work. And that's what we're dealing with now, is we're still dealing with the unhandled business that he described was still the case on the day of his Mahasamadhi, which is why he indicated there was no renunciate order that had integrity that was established around him. And sadly, he kept saying, I feel like I'm going to be leaving this body because I've done all that I can do. But he wanted to be able to stay and be able to live with a core group of renunciates that he could continue to work with and begin to communicate about our processes in the actual seventh stage way.
Mm-hmm.
Not what we were calling the seventh stage way and how we had dramatized it up until that point on him that ended up isolating him. So this is a consummate moment of realizing what he was speaking to. And again, as I said earlier, that moment he spoke to Sukhumai is the same thing he was saying to her in 2008. In detail. You're still dramatizing this bullshit on me? That's unhandled business, you see. And he would say that to me. He'd say that to each one of us in different ways in the conjunctions, wherein because we're independently dramatizing, we're not then relating rightly to one another to be held to account relative to the true ego self-transcending yoga that had to happen in relationship. It has to happen. That's the cave of renunciation, is relationship itself.
Right.
Prior to and beyond relatedness, but still unqualifiedly in relationship. And as he indicated, because everything continues to arise.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as if the way of the heart has to do anything to do with stopping arising,
Mm-hmm.
like outshining is all of a sudden nothing arises anymore.
Mm-hmm.
However, so I don't think there's probably not a whole lot more I could say in detail without myself.
That's fine. I mean, for me, I think it'll be revealed if it hasn't been addressed. You know, I don't think there's anything. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to the words that you used, I can immediately envision all of the things that he means when he says there are just certain things you don't do.
Right. Well, I mean, because I long nothing more than to understand him better and to get to know him better. I feel that that's not something that was particularly self-evident to me in reading it on the page, what he meant by that.
Yeah. So I'll go
I
back
can only surmise and imagine and interpret, but that's not, I don't feel that doing that in a void or, independent from a true culture is appropriate. You know what I mean?
I couldn't agree with you, as we have learned really clearly.
Yeah.
That's actually what he means by, and what the truth of necessarily formal is that the process occurs in relationship. The form is relationship itself.
Right.
That the culture of true and right relationship, satsang and sangha in the bright.
I mean, my understanding about Sister Christine is that she was a recluse. She was a recluse. So it was a pattern in that lifetime to be that way. And obviously, so I mean, just taking what you said, for example, it seems to me that self-evidently it's not as though that pattern has changed based on the conjunctions that have been drawn by beloved himself.
Mm, mm, mm.
And that that her confession in that dialogue was that she could feel in her deeper, that her deeper personality had longed for a life with Swami Vivekananda that she never was able to have. Again, that seems to me something that isn't that different than what is being played out in the present time.
And it was played out with him. He allowed that.
Right.
He allowed that to be played out, but the attachment was not let go. It's mistaken as true devotion. You know,
And so
being able to be bound to an identity of a romanticism. You know, it's the air of the Quandra Raymond play.
And yet, what came to mind for me was these images that he made where he used her as a photographic subject, where she is expressing what he described as the title and the subtitle of that. You know, he's expressing in those images something about the transcendence of that in those images.
Yes, yes. And that's the paradoxical coinciding of truth itself, always inherently transcending that which is arising and in relationship to him. And therein the devotee then does not do the enactment of superimposing self-identification in relationship to an other.
Right.
That's what the devotee does not do.
Yeah, I think the title
that's what breaks the spell of patterning.
Right. Love of love itself is the title.
Yes, yes. And true love itself, by love. So that, and this is a lot of what we were talking about, is that the errors that we make that are the patterned egoic errors, that are just patterning, is that they're represented in various forms that came around him that either manifested incredibly beautiful things or things that were dark and not so beautiful. It all was there in his person. So the beauty even of what the love between Raymond and Quandra as a love between a man and a woman, or even the he and the she, the ultimate, you know, God and goddess image, you know, all of that. Adi Da is saying, no, not it, not truth itself. You see, so it's difficult for any seeming persona and the patterning in conjunction to lose the face of that identity, to be stripped of the ground upon which one seems to depend for sustenance and existence and perpetuation, particularly when there is extreme attachment and dependency.
Yeah.
You know, that goes, as Beloved describes, hell deep, and yet synchronous with the beauty of what seems to be what everybody yearns for, you know, is that kind of romanticized or even cosmically realized unity of in love is not it in truth itself. And particularly if you have played roles of serving the process of his demonstration of the bride itself in the midst of those patterning, and he's pointing out to you, you know, that, oh, you were this goddess, or you are this form, or you were that great one, or you were that piece of shit, you know, whatever it was on the full spectrum of possibilities, that the error that we would make is identification with the story, identification with the mythology, identification with identifying with the character within the mummery itself, anyone upon the stage at all. That identification and the dramatization of that and wanting to set it in stone as essential and necessary for the process itself is what you don't do as a devotee. In other words, the mummery is not, enacting the mummery is not the yoga. It's to do so as a true priest or priestess, we actually are enacting the mummery. I mean, we could have sacred events and do it formally, but they would just be fake. Because in life, we're actually dramatizing the enactment of the actual mummery itself without the demonstration of the transcending of it. Mm-hmm. So if we actually want to be a sacred order of true priests in life, we actually need to have life be a performance assisted by virtue of divine grace, ego self-transcending yoga that goes beyond the mummery enactment, you see. So when Adi Da indicated that the trilogy or the mummery itself needed to be enacted as a sacred event that would trigger the subjective process of self-inquiry, self-understanding, reception of the context within which truth is being revealed, not the characters, but be able to understand and go beyond and be held accountable for the transcending of that in relationship to all the characters on the stage that goes beyond any distinction and difference. So that would be the purpose of what Adi Da, again, like with the study of the basket of tolerance, he said this should be being done constantly. This performance assisted participation in observing our dramatization of the mummery reflect back to us through the performance of it. But you see, in actuality, we're doing that in life all the time, but we're not recognizing it as a performance or a sacred act within which we could actually help one another go beyond the continued repetition of the ego of mummery enactment. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that was his
all mummery is what I remember, beloveds. It's all.
And to say it's all a mummery from the egoic perspective, you know, and the ego says, well, it's okay, it's all mummery, so it's okay if we just keep doing it, and somehow grace is going to intervene and it's all going to change. No, that's not it. That's not the way of the heart. The actual ego self-transcending process does not dramatize egoity from the beginning. That's the process in satsang. Inherently, it is ego self-transcending, even from the very beginning. And then at the end of his life, he says, you have hardly even begun because of unhandled business. And then that's why I say the conversation that he was repetitively having is the same one that you're pointing to relative to certain aspects that certain people aren't even necessarily aware of yet because they haven't listened enough. They haven't observed and understood, haven't really understood the argument of the teacher. They can apply language, verbal language to it, you know, and say, I'm doing this or I'm doing that because I belong to the club. That's not it. It's not it yet. And that, you know, you've talked about this, and so many devotees are like heatedly involved and passionately involved in how to bring the Leela alive, the true Leela alive.
Well, there it is.
Yeah. It's extremely paradoxical, but as he says, and it's a mystery, it's an ultimate mystery. But as he indicated also, perfect knowledge itself transcends paradox, because paradox comes about in the context of duality. But when truth itself is the context within which we live this process in relationship to one another, duality is resolved or dissolved and gone beyond. So the paradoxes do not yield a potential for justifying dramatization. of egoity. We actually live differently, and our eye to eye, heart to heart, face to face interaction then becomes one of recognition. Mm. And that was the turnabout that would always happen in his company by force of his presence, physically in the room with us when there was any kind of a significant shift or establishment of what he needed to accomplish. So that same kind of recognition itself must be exactly as it is in all relationships to everyone and everything, to bring it into manifestation as our response. Otherwise, as he said, his work will not continue, even though what he established is irrevocably present, meaning that the means are always already present and have been brought into the consciousness of this universal domain, this cosmic domain. And it's creating a stir.
Yeah. I'm not entirely certain that outside of these exchanges, I mean, as I stated before, it's all entirely by grace that my day-to-day sadhana has been revealed. There isn't really, to the extent that I have submitted for guidance from the existing culture, it hasn't come from there. Nothing formidable as regards my process, my practice has come from any attempt that I have made to try to locate an instrument of his function, an extension of his sacred function as guru through, the mechanisms of sacred authority, so to speak. I haven't received it, like it hasn't been self-evident in that form. Therefore, I have constantly simply turned to him, and it has appeared and manifested by grace through whatever means, which includes now these types of occasions with you, for example. And so for me, outside of this type of instrumentality or vehicle of consideration about him, conductivity of him through tangible reception of his transmission, fully received and felt, there isn't really a sacred culture, so to speak, with which I am participating at the moment. And yet it is so full, that it does allow me to feel that he is absolutely present. Unquestionably, and it is absolutely validated as a searchless process, because there isn't anything that I'm doing to generate it. It's entirely given by grace, moment to moment to moment to moment.
And you're making choices by responsively participating. That's what the turning is.
Yes.
Yeah, by responsibly participating and noticing and making right use of.
Yes. I mean, he is unquestionably attractive, the most attractive force in any moment, waking, dreaming, sleeping. But I mean, to that point, when he asked me, for example, did I ever, because I had told him at some point, I had explained to him, how I had dreams about him, and how I had at some point, even while on retreat, all of a sudden there was an onslaught of lucid dreaming that was occurring, wherein I would know that I was in a dream, and therefore I would start experimenting with that possibility. And typically up until then, it would always be, what are you going to do? Fly. So flying was a big feature in those types of dreams, until, of course, beloved was, I was spending so much time in darshan, it was just like, at some point I was like, I want to see beloved. But then the question, of course, arose, So you know, or even like, for example, I at some point it was such a lucid dream where I was considering, you know, it's like a bowl of fruit or a chair, and it would just manifest, right, instantaneously. But they would manifest in with such glorious and incredible detail that I couldn't comprehend where that came from, because it clearly wasn't just my own mind. It was something so exquisitely intricate and like beautiful that I was starting to contemplate within the dream state, whose consciousness is this? Is it even my own consciousness? What is, you know, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
Then I was really impressed with like how real it all felt, to the point where I was like, I wonder, like, beloved, you know, could I summon beloved, because I really want to see him.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
And so you know, I instantly like invoked him in a sense in my dream, and nothing happened, like nothing, right? And then I was like, but all of a sudden I felt, oh shit, I'm in trouble. Like I knew that he knew somehow that I had tried to do this. And then all of a sudden I see him in the distance, and he's walking towards me, and he's got his staff, and he's communicating to me, not verbally, but he's like, I come, but I come when I decide to come, not when you know what I mean? So there was this, so I explained to him in the waking state, of course, that I'd had, you know, these types of dreams, and that this was one of them, for example. He asked me the question, does she ever experience me beyond her memory of me from her gross body mind point of view? And if so, and how does she experience me in the dream state? And that was a very profound question that, to you know, to your point, you've said you've had reverberations. That has had reverberations for me continuously throughout my entire life and process in relationship to them, because there is a point at which we've talked about form does dissolve. It dissolves, and he as he is, it's not something that I can just say him like in his bodily human form. It's not even, it's, I don't even know exactly how to qualify or quantify the multitude of means through which I am completely combined with him, but it's not within, you know, a particular, I can't even say, well, yes, sometimes it's, you know, the current, sometimes it's not that, sometimes it's a sense of infinite, like eyes open, no sense of self whatsoever, none, not even the capability to identify a self, like without any kind of capability to do that. And the feeling of absolute non-separateness, that he is absolutely the only one who is, that there is no, literally there is no other. I mean, there's like, these are all just things, of course I'm saying using words, but there's, and then of course there are certainly, like, in dreams, states, being drawn into states that have qualities and characteristics that go completely beyond any sense of the body, and, you know, so on and so forth. But the reason why I say that is because I feel that the process is continuous. It's always a revelation of what is undifferentiated, you know, non-separate. There isn't a sense of there's no conflict, no sense of conflict whatsoever. It's all encompassing. There is no problem with form. It's not to say that there's, you know, a problem with forms arising, but it's also not to say that there's a cause of forms arising. They're just spontaneously present, arising within him. You know, you think of him in his bodily human form. That's what I mean. It's like, it's not just, you know what I mean? So, but it's a very tangible, real process of constant, I mean, self-abiding. This language that he uses here, for example, tacit apprehension, divine self-recognition of the tacit apprehension of difference until all in all that apparently arises is self-evidently outshined. Now, literally, there's an
Yes.
outshining quality
Yes.
about him.
Yes.
When I say him,
Yes. Yes.
as he is
Yes.
in
Yes.
divine recognition.
Yes. Yes.
of-
Yes. Yes. And you know what you're describing, of course, is darshan. It's
Yes,
darshan.
it's identical to darshan.
Perpetual darshan.
Perpetual darshan. That's exactly right.
Yes, and the most interesting aspect of the dynamic of how things seem to be arising, if they're simply arising on their own without the interference of the ego act itself superimposed upon that, and restructuring the form of merely being, merely rising, then Adi Da indicates, and we can feel this, but even in what you describe, is that there's no conflict anymore because there's no duality.
Right.
So it manifests in relationship as an ability to unqualifiedly allow that outshining to be magnified, because we're not superimposing the dynamic of duality and limiting it at all. Yeah. And if there is a conscious participatory agreement that that is the foundation of the root yoga, and that's what we cultivate in one another, then the culture itself would look entirely different than it is at present. And Adi Da indicated that the true governing force of this way would be signed by no conflict in the totality of the whole of the culture. That's what would be cultivated, rather than differentiations and distinctions being defined and made overly much of. So that we would be inherently recognizing the beauty of the perfection of the distinctions between the differences, rather than having the differences make a difference.
Right. Yeah.
So thereby, what's interesting is that, like, even though there seems to be these differing points of view and these warring factions and arguments over, how it should or shouldn't be or whatever, is if we with any devotee that we could sit down with, if they allowed themselves the freedom to be in the room with someone who seems to have an opposing point of view,
right,
immediately, if the context of satsang, as we all did with him over all these years, we sit down in darshan and in satsang, as you described, it's all dissolved.
Yes.
What's important?
So profound.
Yes, but that is immediate. That doesn't require waiting for anything. Like that's the actual yoga moment to moment.
Yes.
That's the capability for that responsibility is the transition from the foundation preparatory sadhana to the responsibility for hearing and seeing in the perfect practice. And he said those signs would be obvious, because then the resources and the whole availability of the magnification of the responsive beings required to manifest my work would be present, just as it would occur for him when he needed whatever was required. And then his disturbance and frustration because we kept interfering with that submission, of our submission, allowing just the manifestation of whatever is necessary to come into being without our interference. So it's just the mere fact that the refusal to get in the room together, as one, and narrowing it down to a particular Hofic mechanism of who can belong and who can't, based on whether or not you sign on the dotted line that I agree to this present time seniority. It's just ridiculous. It's laughable, because it's tragic laughter, in the sense that the error is so obvious, because I know that if I was able to get in any room with any devotee, that there would be, the heart is open to allow satsang to simply manifest, the argument dissolves.
Right.
And that's all that's necessary.
Yes.
That literally, that's all that's necessary. And to remain, that's what he means, in my house, the process only occurs.
Right.
And
But
yet
so here's what I've observed about that very phenomenon. Even coming into the room is avoided because there's a sense that that might happen.
Yeah, there's all sorts
And
of
there's all these other rules that they
unconscious-
have to abide by in order. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's all the configurations and justifications and reasoning of mind. It's infinite.
Mind. Yeah.
It's unfathomable possibilities of that you could put your finger on and say, that's the cause, that's the cause, that's the cause, that's the cause, that's the cause. You're the cause, this is the cause. And it's like fruitless.
No mind. Yeah.
But the thing that's tragic about it, and that's upsetting and frustrating the most, is that the thousands of beings that are available to participate in right relationship to the treasures, that have been actually empowered to do so by virtue of their converging with beloved within this lifetime, could be cultivated completely differently than what's happening right now, so that Adi Da's work could exponentially be magnified very quickly.
Yes.
By virtue of coming into this room without making delusional presumptions or dramatizing errors of identification with ego patterning. And then calling it Adi Dam as it is manifesting. No. Adi Dam is all inclusive.
Well, I think
and that is the true heart impulse, So I completely trust that process and the seeming time and spaceness of it. Every moment my objections don't mean shit. So it's and yet I have to, by virtue of the specific sadhana, and I feel this, with a number of individuals that what may be obvious to me might not be obvious to others, but what may be obvious to them may not be obvious to me. Like, I'm not unrealistic about the fact that we need to be in a true right servant's relationship to the process itself with one another, because of the uniqueness of the instruction that he gave each one of us to be able to help one another see and feel beyond all of the liabilities and the reverberations that manifest as a limited form and conditional manifestation. So we are servants of the whole. As he indicated, that's why he loved the differences. They were necessary. They're necessary, but to transcend the whole. So you can't take a small handful of ones who agree to a certain scripted pattern and say, this is true Adidam, and you're not allowed unless you agree to this program. To do that, this is what to do that, we want to help. We're not a hindrance, and while there's an upset about the way that it's happening, it is truly the case that I recognize the devotees. I recognize the devotee's heart. And that's why it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I can explain it or talk up and down, whatever, about it, but it's not it. It's a total waste of time in that regard, because it's falling on deaf ears. There's just too much that is being protected that are about errors of identity and identification with, like when beloved said to me, whenever you get in a position where you own too much or know too much, you will get yourself in a great deal of trouble. And one time when I said this to a devotee, she said to me, do you think he was talking about himself, or was he saying something about you? And I had never, ever even thought about that being his own confession in relation to Boz being broken.
That's what I just received for the first time, hearing the entire Leela, the context of him saying that, because I had heard you say that statement. I didn't understand, but I had never received the full context. But now in the context, that was the first thing that occurred to me.
Well, and as he says, I am not other. You know, so it's just the gesture of like the taking on the mantle of responsibility for the divine process and truth in relationship to anyone or anything. If you ever begin to own too much or know too much, you will get yourself into a great deal of trouble. That is a truth. It's a law,
right?
Inherent.
So
the constant renunciation,
right,
is
and
necessary.
Exactly. So if I'm hearing what you are saying accurately, or interpreting what you're saying accurately, to the extent that that's not happening in relationship to the sacred treasures, it applies as a law, as it would to a worldly person. And on that point, this topic of nesting can happen just as much in and around sacred, holy, empowered places as it does in the world.
Well, precisely, because it's the same gesture.
It's the bonding. It's the error of the bonding and the attachment.
Yes, exactly.
And now I understand the answer to the question.
Yes.
The one thing you should never do.
Precisely. Yes. 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 The outshining is prevented by that gesture.
Yes.
And the willingness to volunteer for the heart to be so profoundly broken in love.
In love, right? In service. In love.
And if you are not, if you are not in love, you would not know the knowledge of the broken heart. And that is inevitable to be arising in the context of seemingly conditional forms. The heart will be broken. Everyone and everything dies, as it appears to seem to be. And it's real.